Thank you for remembering to turn on the recording. Um, as I was just saying, is we're just starting our introduction, saying that we don't usually like to do a lot of reading off of our resumes and that sort of thing. I think that's part of like white dominant culture. That's like your credentials are more important than your actual experience or what you're able to communicate. So we like to just jump in and let the work speak for itself rather than rattling off all the things we've done. And in this case, I think it's worth sharing just a little bit of our backstory to understand where we came from and why we're doing this work. And so Carlos and I met at a little nonprofit here in Portland, Oregon called Resolutions Northwest, where Carlos hired me, I don't know, over 10 years ago at this point, about 10 and a half years ago. I remember because my youngest child was 10 days old and now she's 10 years old at my interview when we started that job. And so it was a mediation center that merged with a racial dialogue program. And there's a long, weird story that goes along with that. But what it ended up doing was that the conflict resolution work we were doing was also infused with an anti-racist and equity-informed approach. And it turned out we started getting lots of calls from folks who were either trying to do racial equity work and having conflict, or had some awful racialized incident happen at their workplace, and then they needed conflict resolution support. So I don't think either of us dreamed about being consultants as children. It was not the career anyone thought that we were working towards. Both did long stints in public service and working for various government agencies. I think probably local, state, and federal between the both of us, and a lot of time in nonprofits. And so we got these calls from folks who were having conflict around racialized incidents and a lot of people trying to do racial equity work. And for anyone in the room who has done or been a part of racial equity work, you've probably learned that it generates a lot more conflict than it resolves. And so when I used to call us like the equity busters or something, we'd get people who worked in the office of equity in such and such a place who would call us because they were deep in conflict and didn't know how to move through it to be able to keep their work going forward. So going into all these different local government, nonprofit agencies to look at their racialized conflicts, we started seeing lots of systemic patterns because all these systems are systemic. There's patterns. And so we see the same things happening in these conflicts time and time again. And so we started looking at what does it take to actually transform those systems, not just to make the conflict go away, but to actually create a system that is more just, that is more human-centered, that helps everyone thrive, and that practices accountability and repair of harm when harm happens, especially along the lines of race and also all other kinds of harm. The reparative approach can be so helpful in so many settings. And it's not the way we've traditionally done business in workplaces, but certainly benefits everyone and is particularly helpful when we're trying to combat these patterns of racialized harm in the workplace. So that's a very brief summary of what we've been doing for the past decade. So that's been our full-time day job, is to look at conflict and racial equity and try to help people create systems to get around that. So we have many things to share about what we think has worked and what has not. In the realm of DEI, it's never been our favorite phrase, especially the more people kept playing with it as if it was some kind of like word scramble game. So it was like, first it was just diversity, then it was diversity and inclusion. Then it was diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's DEI. Some people know equity needs to go first. Now it's EDI. And then people are like, well, we need JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I'm like, I love the justice part. I see where it's cute, but I don't like that we just keep trying to like, oh, but my DEI has a better spin on it than your DEI. It got
no way
a little
a white
bit weird.
person didn't come up with JEDI. It was just so weird.
Then it was IDEA because diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. So it's DEIA, but if you put the I first, then it's IDEA. And so a lot of energy went into like acronyms where we saw little progress in actually changing the outcomes for staff of color, customers, clients of color in these agencies. And so it was never our favorite framework. We always worked with, and absolutely Carlos is credited with the person that I learned this from, of human rights, human dignity, and that's really what we were after in doing our work. So it was never our favorite word to call it DEI, but that is what became the dominant narrative. And so it's the one that we and many people like us doing this work were associated with, whether or not it was our frame. And so we left that nonprofit about 6 years ago to go into private practice, each independently, and then ended up doing a lot of this work together. And part of the inspiration for the session is that for about the past decade, every time we start a new project with a new organizational client, and we've worked with dozens in the Pacific Northwest and a few outside of the area across the country as well, we always ask the same questions on a survey to staff that we send out at the beginning. There's a long list of them, but the two most important ones are, how do you define racism as it relates to your work? And how do you define equity as it relates to your work? So for the past 10 years, I've been reading people's answers to this question: how do you define equity as it relates to your work? And so I might ask you all to do the same thing right now, which is take the next 60 seconds. We're going to do this chat waterfall style, which means you're going to type your answer in the chat, but don't hit send yet. How do you define equity as it relates to your work? So take the next few seconds, type your answer to that question in the chat, but don't hit send yet. Then we're all going to hit send at the same time. This just gives everyone a minute to do their own thinking and writing without getting distracted by other people's responses. And don't worry about if you got the right answer, the wrong answer. We're not here to grade. Just to do a quick survey of what we think that word means. All right, so when you're ready, go ahead and hit send. All right, thank you. So we got some answers there. I'm not going to read them all right now, but looking at access to power, giving every person autonomy, equal voices, considering how the pieces make up the whole, make sure the most capable are elevated and promoted to the best positions, use a range of skill and experience, centering the needs of the most impacted in order to create an environment where folks get the resources they need. People's identities not a barrier to their thriving. Representation of different folks, making sure people get opportunities who are often overlooked, and not just overlooked, also like systemically and strategically excluded, right? When we look at this history and pattern. And again, not grading, just think about the ways that we look at these concepts. And so I've been reading these kinds of answers, and mostly in the public sector, social services, nonprofits arena, and mostly in the Pacific Northwest for the past decade. And I've seen some really interesting patterns and also some interesting evolutions. And so what we're going to do today for the next hour or so is kind of look at how we got here to equity being a thing in the first place. About 10, 15 years ago, if you said equity, you're probably talking about like a mortgage or finance or something. So how do we get to this place where equity became this social paradigm that's dominated, social discourse around racial justice and social justice? So we're going to look at the evolution of how we got to equity in the first place. Then we're going to look at the ways that it's being used. And we're going to think about some of the strategies that we think are most helpful in not getting trapped into this narrative domination game that conservatives like to play with social justice language. To me, it feels a lot like schoolyard bullying. It's like, I'm rubber, you're glue, whatever you say bounces off of me and sticks to you. It's like, we're trying to take down systems of oppression. You're creating systems of oppression, right? It's like, it's like whatever we're trying to do, they just say it's the opposite. And unfortunately have seen, one, they're very effective in dominating the narrative. We saw them do this with critical race theory in the first Trump administration. Now this whole DEI didn't earn it nonsense that was going on through this presidential election, and all of the backlash trying to take down DEI now is really this, it's not sophisticated, but it's very effective narrative warfare that just attacks these narratives that are kind of the stories we tell about the progress we're trying to achieve and how we're going to get there, and effectively dismantle them with very simple schoolyard bullying tactics. And I think a place where we have gone wrong in some of this work is treating those as honest arguments instead of treating them like the bullying abuser tactics that they are. And so want us to level up our strategies around thinking about how we continue to hold the line and push for racial justice and social justice without getting trapped into these codependent abuser dynamics that end up coming out in our social discourse around these topics by thinking about how we get more clarity in what we actually mean when we say equity, It's very open to this kind of weaponization and misuse and abuse because it is so poorly defined. And because so many people grab onto it as like a wild card to use to try to win their argument without actually being clear about what are the things we're trying to achieve. All right, we'll go on that. Any questions or comments before we jump in? And feel free to type them in the chat or come on mic. Does anybody have any examples of how you've seen equity weaponized recently?
By recently, do you mean this morning?
Anytime in the past year. It could be this morning. All right, if you think of some, drop them in the chat for us and we'll come back to them as we circle around. All right.
My bad. That was an inopportune time for me to take a big ass bite of dry toast, but I did.
You're fine. All right. So we'll just jump in. What is equity? How did we get there? And we're going to do a quick stroll through the narrative history of equity, kind of what's been the evolution of racial justice and the frameworks and words that we've used to discuss it.
All right, get your stroll music together. Boom, 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 boom.
So we can look at the fight for abolition and emancipation, right? And so these places were like, well, they were a product of their time, you know, these excuses that get made to justify the harms of the past. So the abolitionists were also a product of their time. There were always people fighting for their freedom. There were always indigenous folks resisting colonization. There were always African folks who did flee, who started their own communities, who were successful in resisting and retaliating. There were white people who always knew that this was not okay, who were always fighting to end slavery. And so, yes, it was a dominant paradigm, but was never the only paradigm. You know, so what we're doing in equity today is a direct descendants of the folks who fought for abolition and emancipation 200-300 years ago. We're still a part of that same fight, even though it's been evolving. And so we did have, we just celebrated Juneteenth the other day, and celebrating the time that after the Civil War, everyone finally in Texas was, they received their legal freedom several years earlier, but only in practice received their freedom later. And so those ways of really thinking about what's the policy versus the praxis is also a thing that's been important in equity work, because there's places where there's policy, there's commitments, but in practice, the harm is still continuing, right? And so thinking about the ways that continues to happen. And so we did have this huge achievement of emancipation, and then we have all the narrative retaliation. And there's, many books and documentaries and all kinds of things to look at. We're just doing this very, very briefly. The enrollment of the Ku Klux Klan, right? So we had this first major motion picture of the birth of a nation that was this demonstration of the birth of the KKK and why it was necessary because of all these negative stereotypes of Black folks after emancipation. And for where we are in Oregon, it's a picture of like how the KKK was working with the Portland City Council on their crime and crime prevention efforts, and how often that crime prevention has come up over hundreds of years as one of the primary strategies for dismantling racial justice efforts. And again,
the Klan is the cops. I mean, that's at the end of the day, like the continual surprise that seems to come up in the press when half of the law enforcement in a particular city see Los Angeles, see Portland, see New York, happen to be skinheads, happen to be in the Klan or Proud Boys or something adjacent, right? The other thing worth noting is that these goofy robes that they're wearing were the result of the film Birth of a Nation. The Klan robe as such did not exist. People were running around, these goofs had on burlap sacks over their heads prior to the film. Uh, there was also a huge proliferation in cross burning because, again, it was a symbol brought to us by the film. And within the film
Influencers.
industry,
They were the influencers.
they were the influencers. And you'll see that, within the film industry today, the reason, for instance, that the technologies in a Tom Cruise film and a Marvel movie look so good is because the military has very specific agreements with these actors, with these studios about what their tools are meant to look like, and they give us propaganda, right? So all of the good guys are always cops, whether they're rogue or not. They're always cops, and so if you see tech, if if this kind of thing, it's always a recruitment piece, right? After the first Top Gun, when Tom Cruise still had his original face and hair, he the recruitment that happened with the faux nostalgia brought forward through that film uh, was huge for the Navy. And for the first time in the history of the United States, the Navy was not then seen as the weakest of all of the branches of military. Um, that was Top Gun.
Air
This was
Force.
the Top Gun
Air
of its
Force.
day. Air Force. Sorry.
All right. So much more we could say and to keep it moving. So we go from abolition and emancipation. Now we move into the era of desegregation and civil rights, right? Every time there's an advancement, there's a narrative backlash. The story is we have to do this because it's right to meet people's needs. The backlash is no, they don't deserve it because we're better. We deserve to continue profiting off of other people's exploitation because.
It lowers the value of mine if you have yours.
Right. So we go through the 50s and 60s and the era of desegregation, the civil rights movement, Brown versus the Board of Education, the Montgomery bus boycott, the Civil Rights Act of 1957, the Voting Rights Act, Medicare enforced hospital desegregation in 1965. So that's, a decade after Brown versus the Board of Education. Equal Pay Act, the Civil Rights Act, Title VII, the ban discrimination on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. So again, these legal accomplishments that are really about giving people legal rights, but they don't necessarily compel immediate application of that law. But we do at least see that the country's moving in the area of saying, this is what we commit to, right? It's the equity statement. We're committing to this law. What it's going to take to implement that will require more effort, right? And so then we see that narrative backlash again, narrative, but also physical. So we see the backlash of the protesters protesting desegregation. We see the strategic policies that destroyed Black communities throughout history and all over time. The Tulsa race massacres, this is our local one, Vanport in Oregon, that was a town. It was the second largest city in Oregon and racially integrated, and a lot of intentional and unintentional effort that went into allowing that city to get flooded out primarily to try to drive all the Black folks out of Oregon. And again, so much we could say about Oregon's history. We're not as progressive as we like to believe we are, especially if you look at our history. Again, lots more to say there. We'll send out links to all these things if you don't know about these pieces of history where you can learn more. So we see that backlash of, no, we don't want to desegregate. We want to stay separate, and we want to drive people out of the places where they have come to arrive.
Wait, I'm sorry. Go back one, if you would, please. If you look at the woman all the way to the right with the book in her hand, other way, and look at that forehead. Holy shit. Okay, that's all. I was astonished. I've spoken about this quite a bit, but Dr. King had articulated it prior to moving forward. The idea of aspirationalism, the idea of using the language using education, using the tools of the master's house to defend, amplify, and justify our existence and humanity, um, in order to integrate, right? Specifically to end segregation. And over time, what to my mind has become very clear is that integrating into what is a system that is scaffolded and built upon the harm of a people, for that very people to try and integrate into that system, there is nothing there to be had other than harm, right? That is the very basis and root of the system. That is the very root. And it will continue to grow in whatever way that it happens to show up, whether it's got a DEI program or a hiring section or whatever it is, right? Um, it's not about to be a situation where all of a sudden you're finding queer Black folks in positions of executive leadership and running the C-suite. Were that true, there would be a very, very drastic difference in the outcomes, right? And so when King talked about integrating into a burning house, the house is on fire, right? We're here. Baldwin talked about next time fire, the fire next time. This is it. This is it. And when we talked about DEI is not enough in terms of the theme for the entire conference, what we're saying is, what I'm saying is, aside from all of the acronyms and the fights about whatever, right? The acronym is horrible. If you rearrange it, it just spells die. I don't like it. That said, right? Ultimately, what we're fighting for is, to my mind, at this point, right? We've gone through all of these different iterations of calling out for justice. Okay. Um, let us integrate. Let us be as articulate and as well dressed as y'all, and then we're going to be fine. And oh, look, we'll even use your system of electoral politics, and there you have Reconstruction. And what was the response? Well, we will burn you down and chase you all out of Congress. How about that? And erase you from history and pretend there've never been any Black Congress people ever. How about that? We're going to do that instead. Okay. Well, let's use the Booker T. Washington model. What we'll do is we'll get rich. We'll just build our own towns, right? We'll build our own towns from Rosewood to Cherry Creek to Tulsa, and it's going to be fine. And now those are city parks because they were burnt again to the ground with the people in them. Black Wall Street, nope, nope, can't have that, can't have that. Well, how about a civil rights movement? We'll do that. This is what we're going to do. We're going to have a civil rights movement. The Voting Rights Act of '68, we were just talking about that. Fantastic. We're cracking. It's beautiful until all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Scalia, coming out of that think tank, says, hey, I think we're done. I think we did it. Yay. We won. It's over. It's done. We're good. And then no more Voting Rights Act. It's gone. Right. And now we're back to gerrymandering. We're back to voter suppression. We're back to watching white people literally steal voting boxes, light them on fire. And right now, it just came out 2 days ago, there's a very good possibility that the vote last time was electorally tampered with to a degree that we don't know who the hell the president is. So all of this about the narrative, right? And trying to bring about a nostalgia for this period of whiteness in this country that has never, ever, 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 ever existed. Not once, not for 4 minutes, not anywhere. And yet, that is the goal, built on Nixon's old law and order nonsense, right?
Speaking of
Old,
election tampering.
right? The old Barry Goldwater model, and Stephen Miller running around talking about there should only be 100,000 Americans, and they should all be white. This is the goal. They're saying it at the pulpit. Okay. Just last night, they were talking about systems that, if they were enacted, the farmers should be completely responsible for the people who are working on their farms, and they should give them housing, and they should. Oh, slavery? Oh, what? Not a surprise. Should not be a surprise. The country is built on pillars of free labor for the WASPs.
And so on the screen, for anyone who's not looking at their screen right now, there's a screenshot of a tweet from last year that said, on June 19, 1964, Republican Senator Barry Goldwater voted no on the Civil Rights Act that ended racial segregation in America. The very next month, Republicans picked Goldwater as their presidential nominee. Right? It's like, all of this has happened before. All of this will happen again. It's the same story that's been playing out for the last 200-300 years, 500 years, right? And just looking at the past 100 years, past 60 years of US history. There's another screenshot of an article from 2016 talking about how Trump is recycling Nixon's law and order playbook and has only continued to do so, right? And so looking at these tactics that continue as backlash every time. So we move out of the civil rights and desegregation era into the era of affirmative action, which started in the same time. The first President Kennedy was the first one to sign an order in 1961, introducing affirmative action as a concept that required federal contractors to ensure that applicants and employees are treated without regard to their race, creed, color, or national origin. The first employee resource group was created at Xerox in 1965. And as a result of Black Americans coming together to advocate for pay and equity at Xerox in 1965, by 1968, Xerox was the first company to commit itself to what we would now call DEI, but making a stand on affirmative action and making space for Black Americans in particular to move into spaces they had structurally and very explicitly been excluded from up until that point. And we continue with that narrative retaliation, which is always, but you don't deserve it though, because you're bad, pretty much is what it comes back to. That same law and order, the same thing with the fear mongering of Birth of a Nation, just pulls through all the way up until now we're into the 80s and looking at the way that Willie Horton is the image on the screen in between the first President Bush and his opponent, I believe in 88, Michael Dukakis. And this Willie Horton ad was just a like 20-second ad that said that Dukakis was letting people like Willie Horton out on leave from prison to go and commit more crimes on the weekends. And taking the story of one man and all the extenuating circumstances when at the time prison furlough was actually very common and delivered a lot of positive results, was actually by and large helpful in reducing recidivism and managing harm within the prisons. But largely because of this campaign and the way it was politicized to win this presidential campaign, started to shut down all of those programs that were helpful in rehabilitation. There's also the drama around the welfare queen came out. There's a very interesting and tragic story of this woman, Linda Taylor, who was actually biracial, who was like painted as the poster welfare queen. It sounds like she also had a lot of mental health issues and had maybe murdered some people and committed a whole bunch of other crimes. So, but they didn't talk about those. They only talked about how she was getting welfare checks. And so all these stories that get made up, these myths to say why Black people in particular deserve to be mistreated and excluded, are responsible for their own suffering, is the backlash that comes out every single time.
Beg your pardon. So we moved into this weird era in the late 80s, early 90s, where it really locked in this idea of tolerance, right? Well, we've got to be tolerant. We have to be tolerant of all the differences. And this uh, was something that, you know, while the intentionality, again, being put forward by some of the four leaders in the movement for human rights and dignity. Specifically thinking of on the screen, you'll see Teaching Tolerance Program project from the Southern Poverty Law Center. There are few who have been in the movement longer than and more effectively and than the Southern Poverty Law Center. Okay. That said, the frame of teaching tolerance, I am disinterested in being tolerated by anybody. That is not it. I want to be celebrated. I want to be revered. I want to be loved. I want to be adored. I want to be part of the situation. And if I'm honest, I want an audience. I do not want to be tolerated. Gross. That means this is your space and you can close it to me whenever you want. Right. Toward the end of the 90s, that conversation happened quite a bit. And we broke through in the early 90s. I was when I began college, I was a diversity counselor in my dormitory. By the time I had graduated, we were deep in the throes of multiculturalism as a framework for social change. Well, if we're all here, me and my Bolivian friends and my Iranian friends and all my Black friends, and okay, that one white guy can come too, and all right, it's going to be fine now. And interpersonally, for sure, it was much better. It was much better. Gen X had a good time. Lollapalooza was a blast. It was great. It was great. That said, it did not change anything. And we were very disappointed about that. You know, very, very, very disappointed because we thought that through representation, we were making big moves. And that carried all the way through to Obama, I would argue. We thought we were making big moves. I celebrated, I cried. We're making any moves. We just browned, you know, but doing the same thing structurally does not create the change that is going to lead toward equity. Teresa.
And so you see in this era that it really shifted from working for concrete legal rights and codification into this era of like education, and the focus in shifting from let's make sure that we are ensuring rights for Black people to let's try to make white people less racist, right? So this era of like educating white people to be less racist. And in a way,
books.
At the same time, while retaliation and rollbacks were happening on the legal level. Right. So at the same time as multicultural education is really growing in the educational field, we have all these rollbacks of affirmative action programs at in court cases at schools around the country. Proposition 209 in California that banned race as a qualifier for college admissions in the 90s. And then we had that Supreme Court ruling that came out last year for private institutions nationwide. So we can see that as it's growing here in educational places, we also have all the legal retaliation coming through to start shutting down the legal routes to additional rights and access that had been created by previous generations. And there's a list of rulings here on the screen that you can look at if you want to learn more about them later. Which brings us into this era of diversity and inclusion.
Which is good. It's good. It's better, right? It's good. It's better. It is moving toward healing. Now, you may notice that as we are moving toward healing, we're talking about decade by decade, right? This is not generation by generation. This is not a fast transformation, right? Though within my lifetime, uh, uh, I have within my lifetime, I have been able to recognize myself as a two-spirit Black Pueblo, right? Which took decades of unpacking all of the layers of what I had been led to believe in, the limited understanding of what race is in this country, right? Because as I was raised, I was Black, and that was it. And I was a Negro for quite some time of that. I think for the first 4 or 5 years of that. And then I was no, and then I was African American, and then I was Black, right? The outrunning of the language has a lot to do with trying to implement and to cement many of the changes and transformations, small though they may be, that happen through the processes of reconstruction, of integration, right? And now of trying to do the work of equity and creating parity within the workplaces. Yeah. Creating parity within the workplaces. Now, a lot of that comes from people my age who've gone through all of these different transformations and went through the Benetton version of diversity and inclusion where, hey, we're all together. And it was cute. It was lovely. I loved it. That said, the focus on representation of diverse identities, right? That was considered success. That was it. That was it. Right. Do you have a friend who is disabled? Oh boy, look at you. Your group is the most progressive group in the world. Now, did you do the things that are necessary for this person to have access to all of the things that all of you are doing and do the changes that are necessary within the frameworks of what's going on in your society and circle for them to have the greatest success? Probably not, because how? Right? Often you end up tokenizing folks as a consequence, right? Oh, that's wheelchair Charlie. Well, can he get up to the second floor for the party? We're going to the new upper room. How are you going to get upstairs? Oh, he can't. Okay, well, what do we do? Fuck him. I don't know. Right? The 90s did not have a lot of allowance to it as we were going into the 2000s because it was not about actually transforming spaces, despite the fights that had been led on the national levels, right? Still on the small day to day, there was a lot of work to be done. Same is true for Black folks, brown folks, queer folks, anybody in the marginalized spaces, marginalized and in the liminal spaces, because again, the violence of the mainstream was disallowing and is the decider of who's in there and who's not, right? So the continued focus on our now being peers at universities, starting to run around, write our little books, go to our lectures, have a conference like this. You know what I mean? And we're going to teach all the racism away. And as I said this morning, that has proven to not work because it's not about information, right? You already know. We already know. You know, we know. If you know that the black person's going to die in the horror movie first, then you know what the system is in which we live. You know. Who lives on MLK in every city? You already, or Mandela now. You already know, right? And so right, exactly, Crystal. It's not about the information. Now it's about, well, what do we do with that? Teresa.
And so we're, you know, again, being very broad overview of dominant narratives, of the mainstream narratives, right? We also have the Black Panthers. We also have disability justice. We also have people doing intense work, usually without enough resources or appreciation. But there's many, many threads within all of this. But we have this diversity inclusion movement of the 2000s that's really focused on the workplace and college campuses. And it's been education throughout, but it's really this place where it's organizations opting into this work, hiring diversity trainers, hiring equity coordinators, hiring people to do this work within the office because there is a business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Businesses that have better representation among their leadership are more profitable. They reach more people. There is a business case to be made for diversity, equity, inclusion, and it's driving a lot of the work in the 2000s. We've gone from this place of like violent protests to get basic rights to, you know, legal navigating to this place of optics and a business case for why it serves us all. And so it's an interesting evolution of these places to be in this place where instead of civil rights activists and religious leaders and all these people, you have all these bureaucrats trying to move equity work within their agencies. And then we arrive at the boxes, which is trying to get past the diversity inclusion into equity. And so we arrive at equity. And I have to bring up the boxes because for most of the past decade, when I ask that question, how do you define equity? People will give me a verbal or draw me a picture of these boxes. Because this meme became the dominant understanding of what equity means for most of the past decade. And it was actually a meme created by a political science professor in 2012. And the original captions were, what fairness means to conservatives, and that's each person gets one box, what fairness means to liberals. And this is the one down here with the short kids get 2 boxes so they can all see over the fence. So these boxes really became the dominant definition. We talk about like a meta narrative. This was the narrative of what equity means. It means take the box from the tall kid and give it to the short kid so everyone can see over the fence. And there's a way that it went viral and was so useful because it does immediately make something very clear, is this issue of resource distribution, that the person who has enough can spare a little bit over here to the person who doesn't have enough so that we can all reach the same outcome. And so it's really effective for detailing this kind of fairness, that the equality of everyone getting the exact same thing does not equal justice, does not equal fairness of everyone being able to achieve the same outcome. There's many ways that metaphor starts to break down if we really think about it. And so we have all these thousands of tortured variations on this meme that people came up with to try to make it a little bit more accessible. But here there's a person with a wheelchair. So like, I don't know, the girl got 2 boxes and the kid with the wheelchair got a ramp so that they could all see the game. But why are they still outside the fence? And down here, we got like equity, equality, and then reality, where the one kid's got like 1,000 boxes and the other one's in a hole. And then this one, we're going for liberation, where there is no fence. I'm like, I don't know. It's probably not safe for the kids to just run onto the baseball field in the middle of the game. Is that really what we're after? Maybe it should be a farm instead of a baseball game. It breaks down pretty quickly if you go too far into it, because there's a lot of issues with making this your definition of equity. And this became most people's definition of equity for the last decade, who were actually trying to make decisions. And And when you do not have a nuanced, full understanding of what you're talking about or what you're trying to accomplish with it, it becomes very easy for people to start to weaponize and pick apart those definitions. We're gonna get to that in a minute. And so then we get to this place of the narrative retaliation, and it's, you got the protesters out there with the signs, just like they were behind Ruby Bridges and the young people trying to integrate the schools, to now they're saying critical race theory is teaching racism, right? So this is a place where we get into its opposite day at school, like elementary school. If you have elementary school kids and they come home and it's opposite day, and it's just like, that's their tactic. Critical race theory that's trying to help us break down and understand the systemic racism that forms the foundation of every social structure we have in the US and across the globe, because we exported it. It's been the dominant global order for the past 500 years. Is somehow it's racist to teach people to understand structural racism. So we have all the protests coming out there. Right. So if we, and again, not even understanding, most people could not give you a definition of critical race theory. It just was the boogeyman, right? It was just like a thing to protest in the first Trump administration. We haven't heard much about it this time around because now it's DEI, right? So then we arrived at the didn't earn it. DEI stands for didn't earn it. And calling
Okay, again,
Kamala
look at
Harris
the
and other
forehead.
people.
Again, look at the forehead. Look at the
It's the
forehead.
same forehead.
Look at it. Look at her forehead. That's wild. That's wild. And if you go back one slide, the woman with the white hair, the reason that she's wearing her hair down like that, think about what the forehead is doing under there. Think about it. Think about it. There's something there. It's probably not.
Watch out for a widow's peak. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know. Probably, yeah. Old ladies with widow's peaks or young kids with widow's peaks. Uh-oh, that's no good. That's no good. I don't know why. I have no idea. I don't know.
So this is a level of like narrative discourse we've arrived at where you really cannot have a coherent conversation, because it is not about information. It's not about shared facts. It's not about shared reality. It's about, I believe my story and I'm going to push my story, and I don't care what your story is. And again, it's abuser tactics. It's bullying tactics. And so unfortunately, a lot of us have gotten trapped. Many of us learned our lessons around about 2017 to 18, and how many family members we're no longer Facebook friends with or whatever in those debates, that there was no way to logically, rationally argue our way to convince someone who believes in this story of exclusion and domination to come over to the side of humanity and mutually beneficial interdependence. If they're committed
white
to this,
people was going through it.
committed to this story of I have to exclude someone else for me to be okay, or I want to be on the winning team. It's bully abuser tactics. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of codependent response to that. Like, well, they just need to understand. We just need to help them. Maybe if we were nicer, maybe they wouldn't hit you if you didn't make them so angry. Like, it really is codependent abuser dynamics on a social level, and the way that we have, white people in particular, I'm talking about, have engaged in this discourse around racial justice and giving far too much accommodation and benefit of the doubt to people who are using aggressively abusive and toxic tactics, who are not debating us in good faith, but are just trying to destroy you and your argument by any means necessary, without any good faith willingness to consider alternative perspectives or where we might be going. So believing that people are acting in good faith who are not is a serious detriment to our movement. I've had this conversation just in the past week with leaders, and I'm like, yes, give your staff the support they need, believe that they're capable, but also some people just don't want to do their jobs. You do have people who just don't want to do their jobs. And we've have leaders, and these are women of color leaders we're working with. It's like, you're going above and beyond to provide all of the support to people who don't want to do their jobs.
And certainly
So
don't want to do it if you're the one telling them.
At some point, you have to, set those boundaries and not engage with people in good faith who are not engaging in good faith with you. Doesn't mean you need to be also toxic and abusive and manipulative, but you got to hold really clear boundaries and not pretend that something's possible that's not.
And I would add that, like, right now, that is one of the huge problems in this idea of there being polemics around people, right? Deciding that there are, and doing all of this separation. There are men, there are women, there are white people, there are black people, there are Democrats, there are Republicans. and I want to be on the winning side. If you believe there's a side on a globe, right? I mean, we might as well be for my understanding of what we are trying to do as we're pushing into the reclamation of our humanity, you might as well be arguing with a flat earther. I like it. You're so fucked up. You're not even wrong. I can't have this conversation with you if you think there's a way to win something here, right? And so, given that, moving into the racial equity paradigm of stopping and mitigating harm, right? We're not playing it. We know what's going to happen. So we've got mitigated factors in order to stop the harm and eliminate the disparities as it is happening in real time, right? Taking accountability and making amends for past harms, which is reparations, it's race consciousness. And if we go back to our example of what did I call him? Wheelchair Charlie. I made up a person right, that person is now just a person who works at the place because there's access points everywhere, right? And there is no need to make a distinguishing factor out of the way that somebody's body is functioning and that they are moving their meat puppet through this wild world with us, right? Because we've just made the accommodations available. Yes. And creating sustainable systems in which humans can thrive. Right. All of the the workout girls and boys who love to go running at lunch and need their standing desks or whatever, those standing desks are the reason that everybody else is able to work at the exact same place. That's why Charlie's able to work there. And you don't have to like do a whole new, like, okay, let's reconfigure everything. Because when we actually serve those who are in the margins, when we serve the most marginalized, when we service those who come from those spaces with their lived experience, right? With their lived experience at the center of the decisions that we're making, the decisions will raise boats for everybody. They will raise the boats for everybody. If we get the accessibility needed for and actually find ourselves in a place where we are able to listen to the guidance and leadership of Black women without resistance, without, well, but you have to have a white guy with you, though. Well, but only if Liz Cheney's on your team, too. Well, yeah, but we just need like one white guy in the movie so we can have someone that people can relate to. No, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't. We've tried that. It hasn't worked out very well. So maybe let's give somebody else a shot, right? And there are paradigms where it has been unspoken, yet yielded very clearly where this has happened. Where this has happened with great success and huge financial and structural reward, right? And I hate the example because it's not great, and sport is not where it should be happening. It should be happening everywhere. But if we get down to it, the NBA is an example of equity and how equity happens in real life. In the 1950s, it was a bunch of white boys, about 5'10", and everybody had day jobs, right? And there and Black folks had a league, but it was a whole separate thing. Then they integrated it, and even when they did, there were two coaches, one at UCLA and one at what's that racist city? Boston, right? Two who said, I don't care, man. These dudes, they playing. I'm letting them play. And one player per team came on. It took years of the work that was set out by Lou Alcindor, now Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and all of his contemporaries creating a Black African American representation within the league, right? Which only really happened in the 70s with the integration of the ABA, the American Basketball Association, which was the first time we started seeing people dunk in the NBA because of Dr. J and the reasons he was famous. And now, if you look at what happened this year, right? Giannis, the league's MVP, is a Greek person. The second best player in the league is Jokic. I forgot where he's from, but it's not here. Yugoslavia, maybe? I don't know. I don't know. There are women all over the league who are now referees and coaches in the NBA, not WNBA, in the NBA. And the WNBA has higher viewership because of Caitlyn. And she balling. That's what equity looks like. You can't determine who, make a rule about, okay, we've only got people here because they look like X, Y. No, it's because they ball, period. And people pay and people go. They've got a union, right? Like that is one of the very, 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 very few places, corporations that we can, and it's not done. It's not done, right? It's been two dudes who've owned the NBA for the last like 50 years. We're not there. But the women in the WNBA were the ones who were able to get on their knees and wear those shirts during the goddamn lockdown. They're the ones who brought George Floyd to the fore. They are the ones who brought politics to the table, right? Understanding where the power is, understand where the mythos is. If people want to see boys jump around, that's great, whatever. But like now in the WNBA, dunks are happening. We're there, right? But you had to give people permission. You had to give people the space, and you had to recognize what they are capable of doing.
And does that mean that the NBA is racist because majority Black folks playing in the NBA? This is the
absolutely white people get out. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Right. This is this myth of reverse racism that now somehow white people are being disadvantaged, where all of these programs, the primary beneficiaries of every one of these programs across time has been white women, right? Affirmative action mostly benefit white women. The quotas, white women-owned businesses. DEI jobs, the majority of equity directors and equity officers across the US at least, and I would guess across other countries as well, white ladies. Right. So white people have as much to lose from the loss of DEI programs as people of color do. There's many things we could say about that. A lot of the problems with these programs is that they ended up centering the needs of white folks at the expense of people of color who supposedly they're set up to help. But this myth of reverse racism is one that they drag us into, trying to like prove that that's racist, or, well, then they try to hold us accountable to their misunderstandings of the term. Like they're like Kendrick Lamar's halftime show. And they're like, there wasn't even a single white person on the field. You know, and they're like, what about DEI? And it's like, well, DEI doesn't mean what you think it means. It doesn't mean throwing a token white person into Kendrick's halftime show. It doesn't mean throwing a token Black person into your white people show, right? That's not what it means in the first place. So that they misunderstand the terms and then they try to weaponize them and throw them back at us in ways that don't make sense. But unfortunately, sometimes we get locked into those. So I've seen too many examples of people taking the didn't earn it use of DEI and then running with it, like accepting their framing and then playing ball with that framing of using DEI and say, well, white men are the original DEI candidates, but you're accepting their framing of DEI, meaning didn't earn it. And so now we're in their conversation instead of our conversation. So this is one of those places where I really want people to notice who is setting the framing and who does it benefit and who does it burden. And to not, because it feels like an easy win, accept their framing and then, you know, go in their logic, because now we're on their field and not in ours. And so there's, good article here, good analysis in these things that are on the screen, but really makes me cringe a little bit anytime I see someone take that DEI hire, someone who has a solid analysis, but use their framing, because we're giving them points by accepting their framing in the first place. So that's one of the things we want to do, is not accept their framing. So this myth of reverse racism, I always say the only way reverse racism could exist would be if, there's an alternate dimension where like Africans colonized the world. Then maybe we would have reverse racism. But in this reality, it never happened. And no amount of DEI programs have minimized white people's hold on the halls of power, corporate and political. Now, there's a lot more white women than there used to be, but 75% of C-suite positions in Fortune 500 companies are still white men. Most of our congressional representatives, still white men. A larger number of white women, maybe over 20% white women in some of those places, but only 3 or 4% are Black or brown women and Indigenous women. So we got to look at the actual numbers. There is no loss of power for white people that's happened in response to our DEI efforts. And so then we have, the executive order that came out, day 2 of the Trump administration, talking about illegal DEI and DEIA policies that threaten the safety of the country, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing here is the Civil Rights Act already prevents discrimination based on race. So what they're calling illegal, for me, I'm like, well, it's because they want to make discrimination legal again. They're calling it illegal because they want to make discrimination legal again. It's already enshrined in law. We have the laws to do these things. They're not always implemented as well as they could be to protect the people they're actually set up to protect. But we do have this narrative issue with the way that the laws were written in the 60s around it's illegal to discriminate on the basis of race are being weaponized and used against us in the places where we're trying to create race-conscious policies to make amends for those harms of the past. And so we do have a legal issues where a lot of solidarity funds set up by Black women to support other Black women-owned businesses and groups are being sued by white men and saying that they have to make their fund open to women of all colors. It can still be only for women, but must be women of any race. It can't be only for Black women, even though we know that Black women are facing, compounding difficulties in accessing resources and support across so many different levels. So we're at this place where there is a legal barrier to continuing to move forward the work that we're trying to move forward. And the white folks in power are weaponizing all of those laws in their favor to not have to give up any power or their perceived loss of power. It's this way that what we're after is a world where everyone is more free. Everyone has access to what they need to achieve their full potential, to contribute their gifts and talents to the world so that like life on planet Earth can thrive for not only humans, but for all life on Earth. Because it seems we're in a very precarious position right now where that does not seem a given for our children and grandchildren, right? Versus this other side where they think that it's about reverse racism and like flipping the tables. Like the conservatives think that the goal is to replace all white people with Black people in positions of power or something, to flip the tables, and then they can't even imagine that people would not want to treat them with as much disregard and harm as they have treated everyone else. Again, often the way abusers act, right? So I come to thinking about how do we deal with abusers, and that we need to use some of those tactics in the way we deal with these folks, with whether we have to deal with them in our day-to-day lives or we have to deal with them at work. If at any time you still engage in discussions with these kinds of folks online, I have not done that in some number of years, but some people still are here and there. And so one of the abusers' tactics is this DARVO, is an acronym for Deny, Attack, Reverse, Victim, Offender. And I believe this was coined by, coincidentally, I think a psychologist here in Oregon, at the University of Oregon, looking at examples of accusations of sexual assault and sexual harassment in the workplace. And that what most often happens is that the accuser comes out and denies that never happened, attacks the victim. She's just trying to defame me. reverse victim offender, because I have used my power to do all these good things for the community. She just wants to tear down a good man. Right. And so this pattern is so evident in all these cases that we can look at from well before the Me Too movement through the Me Too movement, of this response to accusations of harm of people in power, which is to deny that it happened, attack the victim, and reverse that role of victim and offender. I'm not the offender, I'm the victim. They're the real perpetrator. And so we see this happen in racialized incidents with what we call white tears, right? Which is not the white people can't have emotions or cry, but it's that weaponization of the tears and say, how could you accuse me of being racist? I'm the least racist person you ever met. My children are biracial. My best friend is Black. Why would you attack me? I think you're the real racist, right? And so it's that deny, attack, reverse victim offender. And so we see it happen all these times. It's happened here, happened here, happened here, happened here. Who are the real victims and offenders, right? We're sitting here and telling the people who have been historically violently oppressed, bought and sold, excluded, discriminated against, and telling these stories about how they're really the violent criminal ones that we need to protect ourselves from, when who are the real perpetrators, right? All the way back through history, the same pattern, right? The thing is that it's really hard to counteract this DARVO. And it's because our culture has this codependent abuser dynamics in it, where we cater to abusers because they have been the ones in power and the ones with the power over our personal lives. You know, my grandmother could not get a credit card without my grandfather. You know, there was really no alternative to her if she had wanted to leave him, but to accommodate and make do and get by. We're not that far from that. And so if we look at, you know, what's the difference between debate and abuse? You know, if you're debating, you're discussing something in good faith, trying to arrive in an agreement based on facts, data, and your moral compass, you know, trying to thoughtfully consider alternative perspectives with empathy for lived experiences we don't share, versus the abuser just wants to win and dominate by any means necessary. There is no good faith. They're not trying to understand. The more you try to justify and explain, the more they twist your words around and just look for anything they can weaponize to destroy you and your argument. They do not care. They're not actually trying to arrive at agreement or understanding with you. And they do not express empathy or understanding.
So, I mean, that gets this very idea, right? That's on the screen. It is a thing I've been saying for a long time. I love chess. I love chess. It's my jam. Been playing since I was like 6. Um, you know, and the thing is, when you sit down, there are agreements that have to be made before you begin the game, right? Are we playing speed chess? Are we just having a game? Are we having multiple games? And is there any set of rules that we ought to know about before we begin? That you know, if I let go of the piece, am I done? Can I take it back? Like all the things, right? It is very difficult to win a chess match when your opponent is playing genocide. They're not playing the same game. So trying to like intellectualize yourself through the thing and trying to think your way out of injustice when the commitment of the other people is to make sure that you do not have healthcare, you do not have education, you will have prison, there's going to be workforces, there will be slavery. Real hard to intellectualize your way out of that, right? There has to be action taken. And I'm not suggesting it has to be violent action necessarily, but there has to be action taken. Debate culture is so useless. It's so useless. We won. Yeah, Baldwin beat fucking William, whatever his name is. The one who talks like that. What is his name? Buckley, Bill Buckley. Bill Buckley at the Harvard debate. It's over. We won. That was in 1960. What? Come on. Like the debate is over. Now it's just debate tactics and doing that shit that Ben Shapiro does and just talking real fast.
We don't need to prove in words that we're right. We need to act as if we already know we're right and move, right? It's not time to convince, it's time to take action, right? To get back to that place of strategy, moving for outcomes. Not about, or do we all agree that we're right? Here in the Pacific Northwest, we have this horrible need to have like informal consensus with everyone before we can do anything. Is that okay? Are you all right? Oh, I don't know. Oh, should we? I don't know. You know, we have this terrible way of moving like that. It's, you know, how you might move if you're a person who was exposed to a lot of abuse as a child and taught not to trust your own power, not that it wasn't okay for you to make decisions or to be bold or to take up space. If you have often, you know, been accused of being difficult or hard to work with or angry and aggressive, you know, there's lots of reasons we might do that, but we really need to stop trying to explain or defend our rights to exist, our right to take up space, and just go do it, because there's not enough time right now. And so there's another acronym here, if those are useful to you, for how to deal with abusers, which is when you're dealing with abusers and toxic or unsafe people, do not justify, argue, defend, or explain. You do not have to justify your actions. You do not have to argue to prove you're right. You do not have to defend yourself. You do not have to explain why you did something. It just gives them opportunities to weaponize and hurt you. And so this comes from like a place talking about divorce, because it really is about interpersonal abuse and toxic dynamics. But I think it's very applicable to how we talk about racial justice on the social level, which is to not get drawn into these debates and arguments to try to prove that we're right, but to move as if we already know we are right, and to move with each other in that way. You know, don't accept their framing. Do not take their words and then try to weaponize how their words and, well, you're dumb because you're the one who didn't earn it. You know, like it's not helpful. It's not useful. We're just getting baited into arguments that, again, take up our time and energy without making concrete advances in legal rights, in leadership of organizations, in concrete outcomes for the most impacted. Don't give up. Don't give up and don't cede territory, right? We have all these examples. We can just look at Target versus Costco. Target tried to play it safe, thinking they were playing it safe by rolling back their DEI initiatives after the inauguration. And that boycott has cost them somewhere around $12.8 billion in lost sales and revenue just this year. Whereas Costco, who doubled down, and 98% of their shareholders voted to maintain their DEI initiatives, though they may have changed the name of what they're calling it, increased their sales 8% in a time where people are losing their jobs and tariffs and lots of people are losing money. They went up. I was one of them. I went and got my Costco card, right? Because there is that business case. We want to put our time and energy and effort where it matters. It does not matter for us to sit here and argue about Costco versus Target. It matters that I don't go to Target and I do go to Costco. And not that shopping, consumerism is not going to save us, right? But as one example of where we actually putting our energy and effort into action that makes an impact and not just into arguing about it and spending our time and energy, wasting that instead of actually going out and doing what we can do. Some other things we can do is get very clear on our goals, strategies, and boundaries. The other part is heal the part of you who's addicted to external validation. Right? The part of us that thinks we need other people's validation, that's the part that wants to argue because we think we have to prove them and get them on our side. And so that's the internal work we have to do, that we don't have to argue to get everyone else's external validation. And hold the line and don't get taunted into engaging their narrative. Let me see if there's any thoughts or questions from anyone about where you see these kinds of examples of narrative coming up. Either ways that you respond to them, ways that you see people getting baited into them.
What are the thoughts? There's just so many good comments in the chat. Jump in. Would love to hear from you, Monica, Crystal, Nelson. Y'all getting in it.
Hey, hi everyone. Can you hear me? I don't know if this is
Yes,
working.
indeed.
Okay. I think you gave a great example with the Target and the whole Costco thing, but at the end of the day, we have to understand that we want to conserve our energy, right? Like our energy and where we put it is so vital, and how we are always exchanging some way or another. So the communities that we're in, the places that we go, the things that we do is all imperative to how we show up, not just for ourselves, but for, the ripple effects, right? Our community, the state, the world, etc. So really getting silent when we know that it's just yelling at a brick wall, essentially, it's a waste of energy. So understanding the power that you already hold, and like you were saying, just knowing it's the truth. Like, why am I going to sit here and argue that the world is round? Like, that's just silly. It's almost like a child. You're like, we're not going to do this. So that's just a small little piece. But I think when we understand the power that we hold and how powerful silence can be, and just not engaging and choosing to put that into places that are actually going to have a positive impact.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
All right. So one more thing before we wrap up is to get clear on what you actually mean by equity. So we've started encouraging our clients to stop saying the word equity, not because you're going to get in trouble for saying equity, but because it's sloppy and most people are not clear about what they mean when they say that word. It gets used like a wild card in an Uno game to win the conversation. This again where I say we've been asking this question for a decade and see all the different ways it gets used. And I say it feels like it often gets used like the wild card in equity, and equity means whatever I say it means when I use it, right? So it gets weaponized to win more often than it's used to actually help clarify and help us move towards outcomes. And people use it to mean wildly different things, which leads to misunderstanding and conflict. And so I have a handout that I'll share with you all, but just a couple quick ways it gets used is like as a vision, right? So it's part of this vision of the world in which everyone is thriving in a just society. It's not a vision of reverse racism. It's a vision of everyone, thriving in a just society, which is part of my definition of equity. But sometimes that's just people mean like an equitable future. It gets used as a goal where it's more like a strategic policy goal. So the elimination of racial, gender, and other identity-based disparities. Sometimes when we talk about creating equitable programs, people actually mean like eliminating disparities from our programs. But that's much more clear. If I say we want to create a program that eliminates this disparity for low-income, non-native English-speaking students of color, that's very different than saying let's create an equitable program, right? And so it's a placeholder that can mean so many different things. It's really helpful to practice just eliminating it from our vocabulary to say what we actually mean. We get back to the boxes. A lot of people say equity, they mean the boxes and a resource distribution strategy. Which is where people start calling you communists, because we actually are talking about moving resources from those who already have enough or more than enough towards the people who do not have enough. That's a resource distribution strategy. And that is one
communism
that our organizations have power to do. We have power to say, we are going to prioritize this community for funding because they have been excluded for the last 300 years. We're going to prioritize Indigenous communities for funding because we recognize we're on their land and we need to make amends for the harm our colonizer ancestors did, right? But again, that's really different than saying we need to be equitable about our approach to this. It just gets used as a vague placeholder for so many things that it benefits us all to be more clear about what we mean. It gets used, increasingly it's used to mean access. I've heard a lot of folks feel like access is an easier entry point than racial justice. So there's a lot of shift away from race-centered equity work towards access-centered equity work. That's removing barriers, and it can be ADA barriers, but it's also language access, technological access, like people who still don't have capacity with computers. Like there's all these ways that they talk about access and removing barriers, which is important, but is really a different idea than racial justice and reparations for past harms. And so it's important to be clear if we're talking about access, why and for who, and what are we also doing to make sure that we are continuing to center race and not erasing it from the conversation by shifting to access. Accommodation, similarly, is getting people the resources they need to be successful. Certainly can be and is an important part of equity, but it's not in and of itself all of equity, right? This one also, this like giving people what they need in social services is the definition a lot of people use for equity, but again, it lacks that reparative part of really repairing past harms. It starts to get vague when people just mean anything anti-racist or that has to do with people of color, or in the misuse and the abusive part, it means Black people sometimes, like DEI means Black DEI candidate meant like a Black candidate. So that's the complete misuse. But there's a way it gets used as just kind of general approach of like anything that centers or supports people of color is where we're starting to get into the places where it's not as helpful. Sometimes it's a value, just anything that's fair or just, or where it's misunderstood with equality of everyone getting the exact same thing. We have it as representation, which we talked a lot about, is not enough. Representation is not transformation, right? Representation does not guarantee that the vicious system is going to be transformed. It just means there'll be, a person with melanin driving, the vicious system, as with Obama, right? So it's an important piece, but it does not in and of itself create the kind of transformation we're after. And then all of the many misuses and abuses we've covered of the DEI hires, being confused with tokenization, villainizes reverse racism, confused with treating everyone exactly the same, which is always a lie, but is the excuse people use to say that somehow equity is reverse racism. So if we can take a minute when we are talking about equity to get clear on what we actually mean, which one of these definitions we might be using, then it's a little bit easier for us to clarify what we're trying to accomplish. What's the goal we're moving towards? And a lot of the organizational work we do, it's about eliminating identity-based disparities. And now that language is a lot harder to argue with than saying, our DEI program, because now when you say DEI, it's open up to all of these weaponized understandings, and you got to get in a debate, and you're arguing about whether equity is good or bad, and you haven't even come to an agreement on what you mean by equity. But if you say, I want to eliminate the identity-based disparities in which Black and Indigenous women are making 60 cents on the dollar for every white man in this organization, even though they have the same levels of seniority. Now that's a really different conversation to have. And it's a lot harder one to justify what your arguments against it are. It's another one to say, I want to look at why our staff of color have such higher turnover rates, are exiting the organization at much higher levels than our white staff. Maybe they're all moving on to better positions and doing well for themselves, and then we don't need to fix that issue necessarily, right? That I've seen that happen in a couple of places where they've been really good launch pads for people to move on to positions of more power and income. So that's great. That disparity doesn't necessarily need addressed. But if we've seen that our staff of color, all high percentage are going into disciplinary practices and being exited from the organization at the end of their trial service, that's a different disparity that we actually want to look at. So the more specificity we can bring to our conversations and not just use equity as a placeholder for this vast array of potential strategies, the better. So happy to answer questions anyone has. Otherwise, thought we'd give you the last couple minutes to think about maybe just like one way. Think about one sentence you've said about equity with the word equity in it, and then try to rewrite that sentence for yourself. What would you say if you delete the word equity? And again, this isn't about coming up with a new word. It's not about saying we're going to say, candy corn instead of equity or something as some secret code. It's about how do we get more specific and clear in what we mean so that we can be more effective in the strategies we develop.
Candy corn is disgusting. Please do not.
It's probably why it was the first word that came to mind. Crystal said not another acronym. I know it's a thing. It's like they're useful tools in specific contexts, but then when we become over reliant on them, it starts to lose meaning. It's not helpful when you're talking to people who don't know your lexicon of acronyms, right? And it's not helpful when we start to, equity isn't an acronym, but it stands for all these different things, depending on who you are, that it's really helpful to break that apart and be really clear on what we mean and to hold our boundaries, right? Because then if we're clear, I'm working to mitigate this disparity impacting this demographic within our client base. then you have to have a conversation about who's being impacted and how, and what are the strategies for mitigating those impacts. It does not leave you open to, we need to be more equitable in the way we're doing this. This is a way where we get to this, again, it's like schoolyard bullying, where it's just like trying to be right. It's just narrative domination. Like, I'm right, you're wrong. Or the liberal version, which is like, you got cooties and I don't want to get them on me. So the level of liberal discourse sometimes is, I don't want to be associated with that problematic person over there. How do I not get the cooties from the problematic people around me?
I also think it's a way, and I have done this, that's why I'm saying this, to not say the hard thing to the people we know don't want to hear it. So like for me and my all white leadership team, you know, it's inequitable versus like, this is racist. What you're doing is racist. What you're doing is discriminatory. What you're doing is like, you know, it's a way to lessen the blow for those in power or those who we don't want to offend. So I really appreciate this reminder, because I don't think I subconsciously done it, but it's just the way to navigate. You know, you have to say this or that or whatever. But what's going on in the world is just like, also, y'all gonna still do the same BS that y'all been doing. So I might as well just say that was racist. And if they say, are you calling me a racist? I'm gonna be like, I don't know. Are you a racist? Like, that's for you. That's not just thinking of the Darvo and all the other tools that you gave us today. So of how to not engage into these conversations. In particular, when you're somebody who's dealing with power. So thank you.
Yeah, and absolutely, we got to cope how we got to cope. And you going in a room and me going in a room are going to be received differently, even if we say the exact same words, which is why we go in the room together, right? And we have, you know, those plans ahead of time, and we have to be building solidarity with one another in how we're doing this. And it's not about right or wrong. Again, we have been so trained into that, like, I want the gold star, there's a right way and a wrong way to do things, that we can get stuck on like policing each other's form, like if we're doing it the right way or saying it the right way, instead of really getting clear on what we're trying to do and how. Like, if everyone would just say it the right way, everything would be fine. Right. And again, that is the response of a codependent person trapped in abusive dynamics. That's what the mother does to try to keep the peace with the abusive father. Right. And so we have, I know we're at time, and if you got to go, you got to go. There's a book by George Lakoff. He wrote a more famous book called Don't Think of an Elephant, about politics, because when you say don't think of an elephant, everyone thinks of an elephant. But he wrote another one called Moral Politics, and he broke down the moral models of liberals and conservatives in the US. And the conservative moral model he called the strict father. Is all about like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, and everything is a function of individual effort. You get either the positive or negative consequences of your individual effort. And the liberal moral model was this nurturing parent that was more about understanding systems and structures and like trying to help everyone survive and thrive. And it really, to me, looks like the abusive father and the codependent mother, right? Or it's a codependent mother who's trying to free herself of the abusive relationship to make more space for healing for herself and her children and her descendants moving forward, while the abusive father is, you know, dying of alcoholism in his trailer in Montana, if I was talking about a real life situation. But these dynamics where it really is stuck in this place of like, are we trying to keep the peace, or are we trying to heal? Are we trying to like calm them down? Or are we trying to make more space for the people who need it to get away? And so really thinking about those abuser dynamics and how to deal with them as abusers, instead of this, you know, trying to accommodate or acclimate or convince or argue. And so for me, I just want to see us level up our strategies so that we're not just getting drawn into those silly debates and arguments over and over again that go nowhere, but really being clear about what we're trying to accomplish and what strategy is it going to take to get there. Because being right is not a strategy for winning. We've been right since the abolition movement, and it has not been enough to get us all the way to justice. It's gotten us this far. And so those coping mechanisms help you make it through the day. You know, it helps us make it through the day. It helps us get this far, but where do we go from here? And so that's a place around, you know, really leveling up those strategies. All right.
This has been really
Thank you very
fantastic,
much.
but I have to leave. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
so
no,
much
we
for
got it.
having
We got to
me.
dip too, because I got to get to the next thing.
That's
Gotta
right.
get ready.
All right. We could go on. It's the first time we've done this one, so it could have been probably twice as long, but Carlos and I can
Nope.
talk, so we won't do that to you today. All right, next up at 12:30, we have your cousin, Carlos.
Yeah. Yvette will be talking.
Rise, Slay, Rest, Repeat. I think there might be some music, some movement. I think there's all kinds of things going to be happening in there. So we'll hope to see you in there if you're coming for that one. And if not, have a good rest of your day. Hope to see you in the app or around the discussion feed. And we'll have the recordings up of any sessions you missed later today.
Tell a friend, let your team know we're doing it. All right,
Thank you,
talk to you
everybody.
soon.